the powerful aspect of going to Africa. It was, for me, in 2016, that was the kickoff to a year and a half of just the very, very blessed year for me in terms of experiences that I was very fortunate enough to somewhat boondoggle my way through, and sometimes just saying yes to the adventure and getting an opportunity to go.
It's always a little bit of that for us,
Yeah.
right?
Boondoggling a trip to Africa was definitely in my greatest accomplishments as a as a middle-aged guy. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Modern Day Sniper Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Caylen Wojcik, and in this episode, I sit down with my good friend Len Waldron, who is a gun writer for a lot of major outdoor publications, and he is headed to Africa to go on a plains game hunt up in the northeastern Cape of South Africa in the vicinity of Port Elizabeth. I visited that part of the country before in travels in the past, and it is absolutely beautiful, and the hunting there is like no other in Africa. So this episode, we focus a lot on Len's preparation for this hunt, and we set Len up with one of our modern day hunter rifles, chambered in 6.5 PRC, for him to take on this trip and see how that rifle works for him on an African plains game hunt. So we start the podcast off talking about a little bit of history. Len's family has a deep history within the air operations of World War II, where his grandfather served as a bombardier on a B-17 in the Pacific Theater, and we discuss a lot of his, harrowing stories and all of the experiences that he went through, and tying that to the most recent release of Masters of the Air, which is phenomenal if you guys haven't had a chance to see that yet. So we have a great conversation about a lot of different things, and before you guys get deep into the episode, I just want to make you aware that if you have not gone over to the Modern Day Rifleman platform, make sure that you head over there, check out what we got going on, moderndayrifleman.com. That's where we host our monthly subscription service, which is called Modern Day Rifleman Advantage. And that's where we host all of our digital masterclasses, as well as our online community that has over 8,000 discerning long-range shooters just like you, looking for relevant information that's most up to date without all of the drama of the rest of social media. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and leave a comment. We read comments all the time, and we love hearing about what you guys have to say with regard to the Modern Day Sniper Podcast. So thanks for listening, and enjoy the show.
Well, but there's three. There's one of my grandfather sitting on bombs, and one of his crew, and one of the Vunu Canal Air Dome at Rabaul, New Guinea, that he blew up. They got attacked several times and rebuilt.
It's
Blown up again.
so, dude.
And so it's just one of the times it got blown up by him.
Man, just reading that book and watching the footage. I don't know if did you get a chance to watch any of the I sent you a documentary that I found on YouTube about the air war, and it was like all old footage, all like B-17
Yeah.
uncut, like whoa. I mean, there's one clip of, I don't know, it's an American fighter chasing down a 109, and this American fighter is just, I mean, he is probably within 2 plane lengths behind this 109, and he's just stitching him up. You can see the white puffs of the bullets hitting the plane, and then you can see the pilot of the 109 trying to get out on the right side of the cockpit, and he finally is able to separate himself from the airplane. And if he didn't get hit by that American fighter, like literally physically hit by the wing or the airplane, it was like this close. And I mean, it's all happening right in front of you. And it's just, it's surreal to watch that stuff, man. It is absolutely surreal to watch that stuff. And then I didn't really do a whole lot of studying on the air war in Europe, but then it started to dawn on me. It was just like, well, yeah, we couldn't invade France, German occupied Europe, without having air superiority. It was just not a possibility. Right. It wasn't a strategic possibility. And it was a very, very poor tactical decision to do anything otherwise. And now it's understood, like, why we were doing those daylight bombing runs, why we were doing those daylight raids, and why we were conducting business the way that we were. And, and it makes you think, did those bomber crews, like, truly understand the big picture of what they were trying to achieve, or were they just getting told to get into a fucking airplane and go do your job?
Probably it was probably a little bit of both, right? And I think one thing to remember too is, and I'm by no means a historical expert on it, but we had a foothold in Italy, right?
Right.
That we'd invaded, and but the Apennine, I think the Apennines and the Alps are right there
Yeah.
at the top of Italy. So there was no, I mean, they couldn't backdoor us in terms of encircling the
Mhm.
American forces, but it was great that we had Italy, but it wasn't a tactical foothold that
Yeah, it wasn't
Normandy
it was more along the
was.
lines of, just because you're isolated by the mountains, right? You're totally isolated by
Yeah,
the mountains from a strategic standpoint, and there's, penetrating the Swiss Alps and moving north into, uh, Austria was just not the cards. And so
not in anybody's best interest. Yeah, and if if you look at some of the casualties that in particular 10th Mountain took in fighting the Germans throughout the Alps, that was not the way to go. You
no,
wanted you wanted Normandy because it was across the channel from
right.
England, where everything was staged to begin with, and not have to go around Spain into the Med. It
Yeah.
just wasn't viable. But yeah, I think they knew that. I think there was probably a big helping of do what you're told, right? And I know in my grandfather's case, he told me that the attitude there was to slow them down, the Japanese,
Mhm.
as much as possible,
Mhm.
right? Because they were moving south, and there was a royal an Australian Royal Air Force base. That picture that I have uploaded to you is actually a photo of an air dome that the Australians built and the Japanese took over and occupied, and then ultimately we bombed multiple times and then retook it
Mm.
later on. But his understanding was, the you got to remember too is in 1942 the Philippines had fell,
Right.
and the Japanese were had been in Manchuria since at least 1938,
Yep.
and were well schooled, and they were just pushing folks all over the place, and had like Germany did in Spain, and to an extent Poland had been practicing.
Right.
And so when they turned it loose, it was hard, and he was the first to say we were woefully unprepared in terms of the technology in the in the aircraft, and they shut down all of the older ones, the LB9s and B-24s that he had, and ultimately he said the B-17 and the 50 cal machine guns that they had in lieu of the original 30 cals that they had on the LB9s were so far superior.
Yeah,
And the Norden bomb sight helped too.
for
But
sure.
their in his mission, as he understood it, was to slow them down. Right? Was like, you guys here are you're the blocking force in terms of, or just to attrit them, really, more than anything else. It wasn't any meaningful blocking until the U.S. could get its industrial might into the game. You had the Battle of Coral Sea that was kind of a push
Mhm.
in terms of losses on both sides, and then the Battle of Midway was a big turning point. In our ability to operate in the South Pacific, and so I think his attitude was the same, probably, or very similar to what the folks in England had early on,
Right.
as they discuss when you're going through the um, talking about the Brits going at night and the Americans going during the day. It's like it's our job to slow them down. We weren't really offensively doing that much in terms of gaining ground and moving things on a map. It was just a matter of attrition at that point until folks got organized. So yeah, it was
Right.
just tough mission for sure, tough assignment.
Man, it's just, I've experienced a little bit of that. I mean, and for you guys that are listening, we're talking about, so Len's grandfather, And I didn't know this really. I didn't really fully solidify this until our last visit. And I mean, how long have I known you? I've known you since like 2010 or 11, something like
Yeah,
that.
10 years or so. Yeah, yeah,
And
10 to 15 years now, a long time.
I
Yeah,
didn't really solidify in my mind like what your grandfather had done. I'd seen the shadow boxes in your house and kind of like understood that he participated in some things, but I didn't really connect those dots until this last visit, and we started really talking about um, what those men did and what they were responsible for, and literally the casualty percentage was astronomical. I mean, it was 60 to 70%, and that's intense, man. That's intense, and I can relate to that on some degree of like the anticipation of combat and the anticipation of okay, like seeing a massive firefight and knowing that within an hour that's going to be me. Um, but not seeing that over and over and over again like those guys did. Like they would go on missions over and over and over and witness dozens and dozens of men not return to base, right? I
yeah,
mean,
and he mentioned as much, and I want to be very clear. This is his service, not mine. And but I'm honored to tell this his story to the best I know, to the best I know. And what's somewhat interesting is the timing is good now with Masters of the Air. Is that I think the general public is getting a good feel, in the same way that Band of Brothers or the Pacific
sure.
really gave a very vivid view of
Hmm.
what some of those aspects were like. And interestingly enough, the way he described it is very much the way it appears. Um,
Yeah.
at least in as much as one could imagine what those things were like. And I think when you and I talked, understanding where the things that he had described to me in terms of being the bombardier and being in the nose and basically being the nose gunner and having the navigator just behind him and sort of the physical aspects of how those guys moved within that cockpit and fought and on the way to the site and when fighters came in and then on the way out um, and you and I talked about this is that when I was a teenager, 13, 14, 15 years old. His health was in decline. His health was in decline, and but the I wouldn't call it an advantage, but sort of one of the minor blessings of having dementia and Alzheimer's is they can some of those circuits connect to vivid moments in their earlier life, and his I kind of had to hear the reel over and over and over and over again as older people
Hmm.
tend to tell the same stories, and he did, and I thought it was cool. I enjoyed listening to it. I enjoyed his company and enjoyed his telling, and it was usually pretty identical over the time. And then as I got older and was able to research the battle histories, um, he was spot on. Right, there was no
Right.
exaggeration, and it was we hit this target at this date and this time, this altitude, these many people got wounded. One of the for example, one of the battle reports, they were shot down, and he spent 10 days on an island, like just an atoll out in the middle of the Pacific that they crash landed in the water nearby. And I remember him telling me we hit this target. These three guys were wounded. Here's how they were wounded. None of them died, but they were, they had some problems, and we were on this island. The only detail that was different was I think the battle report said they were on the island for 11 days, and he said 10, or vice versa. I don't recall which.
I
Um,
think we could get a day in there, right?
Good enough, right? I mean, fudge for some travel time.
Yeah, exactly.
He was pretty clinical about it all, right? And I guess that's kind of the nature of the bombardier is very clinical in terms of here's the altitude, here's the payload, and here's the type of target, and he's breaking it down in the same way that he would have in approaching a targeting package and determining what they're carrying and how are they going to hit it. I don't think they had a ton of choices. Like in terms of what he explained to me, that the they kind of had to fight with what they had in terms of the aircraft and the parts and the bombs, and
Hmm.
it wasn't always ideal, right? It
Yeah.
was so early in 1942. The American machine just wasn't moving yet.
Right. Well, man, well, and then the book you recommended, Unbroken, and
Yeah,
I promptly downloaded it, and I listened to it on my way back north. And so I had a
yeah.
10-hour drive.
What were your thoughts?
Just well, first off, I didn't want to even read the notes of the book to I just wanted to just jump in. So I
Right.
didn't really know what to expect. Um but the story is epic. It is an epic. And it's almost like the Odyssey, right? It's like a it's it's Louis'
Yeah.
Odyssey,
Yeah.
and that was referenced in
It
the
is
book.
very Odyssey like. It's very
Yeah.
that's mhm.
And like I don't want to do like I know I mentioned the book to some people and they were like, "Oh yeah, I've seen the movie." And I was like, "Oh, there's a movie. I didn't know that there was a movie." So now that I've read the book, I want to watch the movie. And a lot of people that I've mentioned it to, because it was impactful, they said, "Yeah, the movie was really well done." And that's good to hear, but then it's like, I read the book and you know how that goes, right? Sometimes books and movies
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
necessarily
So the
align.
Cohen brothers wrote it. Um obviously super famous and accomplished writers. Not a comedy like
Mhm.
many of their
Yeah.
others are. Angelina Jolie directed it,
Mm,
which
okay.
is interesting. And Laura Hillenbrand is the writer. So
Yeah.
as I mentioned to you, I thought it was, a story that at least every American, if not every human being, ought to read, in terms
Yep.
of just what resilience and faith means, and faith in whatever, you know,
Yep.
faith
And
in humanity, faith in your fellow man, faith in God, whatever, whatever you want to ascribe faith to. But in short, the story, for those who aren't familiar, is a guy named Louis Zamperini, who was an Olympic track athlete and competed in the 1936 Olympic Games, was a bombardier, and was in the same unit as my grandfather in the South Pacific in the early part of World War II, and was shot down a couple times, and he was captured by the Japanese, and it's the story of his internment and continuous torture by one particular person,
mhm,
and ultimately he survived. I don't think that's a giveaway, but he survived, but he was deeply damaged
mhm.
by the experience, and then ultimately returned and forgave the people. Though the one person who's definitely the villain of the story refused to speak to him, refused to meet with him later on. But very, very powerful
Yeah.
story, true story, and to me, it made very vivid the experience that my grandfather had, that I could never appreciate, because it was so much more detailed in terms of the kind of the emotional aspects, and more of a broader context. When I talked to him, and I was younger, I wasn't a mature person at the time, and so putting those together is pretty emotional read, knowing that, wow, that's, he lived with this. And as I think they mention slightly in the book, what happened is they moved the unit from places north down to Port Moresby, in the northern, across the channel from Australia. And they, for whatever reasons, orders were given to abandon many of the ground crew that were with them,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the Japanese put them in key installations in the basements. And they would come over the radio, Tokyo Rose, that played American music, and say, "You killed this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy," and
Right.
knew their names.
Mhm.
Um, and so these guys knew that not only were they, dying in, massive numbers, they're also bombing their own people who'd been put there just to, make it harder on them. And, as you mentioned, my grandfather, as you mentioned, these guys knowing the targets they're going to, whether it was Bremen or any of these other places, he said that Rabaul was one of those locations where he said the hair on your neck could just stand up, because you knew, you looked to your left and your right, and those guys probably weren't going to be there, or you weren't.
Or you weren't.
Um, and he said that they had to fly over. I think they didn't. It didn't sound to me, and to the extent that he described it, they didn't have the anti-aircraft sophistication that the Germans
The
had,
Germans. Yeah.
but they had a ton of Japanese fighters, right? I know the Germans had obviously tons of anti-aircraft and were good at building great anti-aircraft guns and artillery, as we know. But the Japanese, while they had some, and for sure shot it at a lot of Americans, it was the Zero fighter that I think gave them the most concern, and they had to fly over a fighter base, and then hit the target and then fly back over it. And so by the time that they fought off the Zeros, they hit the target, those Zeros would land, refuel, rearm, come back at them again. So Gazmata was, I remember the name of the place that he mentioned that the fighter base was, and this is all like on New Guinea and in that area. So
Just
and they knew it.
just a,
They knew it was going to be a mess, and it was.
an amazing tale of, it's just an amazing tale of just sheer perseverance, will, patriotism, all of the things that greatest generation stood for.
Yeah, and I think though in this case though we get a wonderful feel for a guy who's an accomplished athlete. It's kind of ne'er do well as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Got in a little bit of trouble
A little
growing
bit of
up.
trouble, yeah.
Had kind of a nasty edge to him a little bit, and was a great runner, and then ultimately survives the war, and it was massively difficult to readjust, and those guys didn't have they were
No
just sort of
resources.
expected to put on a suit and go back to work, right?
No resources, right? Just
And the
none.
yeah, none.
Yeah.
And it's something that's very interesting to me, and a lot of them just didn't talk about it. My paternal grandfather was in a unit that was in the Battle of the Bulge. I didn't learn that till after his death.
Right.
He was like, oh, I was here, these things, and this stuff happened, kind of. But I think there was always someone else who had it worse.
Yeah.
So those guys were super reluctant to talk about it. And they were just happy to not be there anymore too.
And happy to be alive.
But yeah. So I think definitely, your listeners no one will waste their time listening to Unbroken or reading the book.
No.
And if you have kids that are, of the appropriate age, read it to your kids. I think
100%.
it would be, if, if I had kids that age, it would be a mandatory read.
Indeed. And it's not a book that's got profanity. It doesn't have, I mean, I don't recall in reference to children. I'm surprised because I read books like that when I was about 13. I was reading Tom Clancy by the time I was 13, 14 years old, and the stuff fascinated me. And this was one of those books that, had just slipped through the cracks for me as a young man. And I really wish that I would have read that book earlier on, but nonetheless, there's not a whole lot of profanity in it at all. I mean, I think I heard like one or two cuss words. If you listen to the audiobook, it was beautifully narrated
Yeah.
by who's the actor that narrated it? I forget, but the movie that comes to mind that he was
let me
in,
look. I just looked up a couple things here. He's definitely
he's the
a
doctor.
recognizable voice. Let me look here.
He's the boyfriend, the mother's boyfriend from Lost Boys. You remember that movie?
Yeah.
That's the dude, right?
Edward Herman. Yeah, Edward Herman.
Yeah, that's him. That's him. I knew it right away. As soon as I heard his
Herman.
voice, I was like, that's the dude from Lost Boys.
Hey there, it's Philip. We hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. I want to take a quick moment of your time to talk to you about the Modern Day Rifleman Shooter Ability Assessment Quiz. The team at Modern Day Sniper came up with this to identify our shooter's ability and place them appropriately in the in-person courses that we offer at Modern Day Sniper. This also helps identify what digital masterclasses they could do in order to increase their proficiency and knowledge of long-range shooting. This quiz is a great way to see how you stack up amongst your peers with regard to your skills behind a rifle and knowledge of modern long-range shooting. The assessment is 25 questions that ask you about your application of modern marksmanship mechanics, your knowledge of external ballistics and ballistic solvers, your ability to call wind, as well as other topics we feel a modern-day rifleman should know. Head to the links down below to take this quiz. Share your results over at the Modern Day Rifleman Network and see what your peers recommend on how you can improve your skills. Enjoy the rest of the episode, and remember, keep your face on the gun.
Yeah, so really good,
Yeah.
really good
Yeah.
book, guys. Well, this is a good segue, Len. So we've alluded a little bit to to these conversations, and I visited Len not too long ago, a couple weeks ago now, and we're getting Len ready to go on a trip to Africa, and the trip to Africa is going to be your fifth trip, is it?
Fifth trip, number
Fifth
5.
trip?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so Len's taken a couple of different rifles to Africa, and I was down in Salt Lake City helping him get himself ready to go. He's going to be taking one of our modern day hunter rifles, chambered in 6.5 PRC, and so um, we just spent a couple of days together getting rifles set up, going out to the range. Getting Len tuned up a little bit on some more modern marksmanship mechanics, because we haven't trained together up until that point for quite some time. And from the last time that you and I had trained together in concerted effort it was like January of, oh man, it was right before we went to Africa. We went to we were
Right.
down in Texas on that Aoudad trip. And
Yeah. What was that, 2016? Was it that
yeah,
long
it
ago
was
now?
January of
Does
2016.
it by? What year were you in Himalaya? Was that 2016? That was the year. It was the same year, because
it
you
was the
came
same
back
year.
and then went to Everest. Yeah. So
That
it was 2016.
we tried a couple of different recordings, guys, and like the internet connection was terrible. So this is -3 right now. So we
Yeah.
this is -3. So um we were talking a lot in the other pre episodes, I guess, to this. We were referring to a bunch of events that happened in 2016, and just the powerful aspect of going to Africa. It was, for me, in 2016, that was the kickoff to a year and a half of just the very, very blessed year for me in terms of experiences that I was very fortunate enough to somewhat boondoggle my way through, and sometimes just saying yes to the adventure and getting an opportunity to go.
It's always a little bit of that for us,
Yeah.
right?
Boondoggling a trip to Africa was definitely in my greatest accomplishments as a as a middle-aged guy. That was a great
Yeah.
trip. So we went to Namibia together in 2016, and we hunted with a very prolific individual there. His outfit, his name is Robin Hurt, and that was your second or third time hunting with Robin.
Second trip with Robin. Yeah.
Second trip with Robin.
Third trip to Africa, and second trip with Robin.
And Len, you could not stop talking about how amazing your experience was with Robin. And Robin is just such an amazing character. And he was in his 53rd hunting season when we were there in 2016. And he's a British Kenyan, if I'm not, is that correct? He's British Kenyan.
Yeah, he was born in London during World War II, right at the end of it, and but grew up in Kenya, and his father was amongst other things, his father was a notable guy. Also, was a lieutenant colonel, and Robin will kill me if I get this wrong, but I believe the Royal Welsh Fusiliers.
Oh,
I
okay.
believe that was a unit, right? And
That's a pretty prestigious unit.
Yeah, and so he was. They were in North Africa. He fought in Ethiopia and the North African campaign, and he was. I think he burst an eardrum, like he was wounded, and was offered the head of basically game management, head of game scouts for Kenya, which was a British colony at the time. And so Robin grew up there and had planned to. His father's plan for him was to go to Sandhurst and follow the family tradition. And he had been admitted to Sandhurst, and then said, "Dad, that's not going to be for me. I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna go hunting.
be a professional hunter, PH."
Yeah.
And off he went, and was a PH from age 18 till present, and
Yeah.
is kind of one of the more remarkable people in a continuation of the history of African PHs, and has managed to do it well for a long, long time.
One of the things that struck me with Robin was, his number one, his demeanor. He's just a really, really, really nice man. And just listening to him tell his stories, it's reminiscent of listening to people talk about their experiences, as soldiers, airmen, Marines in World War II. There's so much history there. And he came up in Africa during the heyday. I mean, we're not talking about like Teddy Roosevelt heydays of African hunting, but we're talking about like, in like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s.
Right.
And just listening to, it's like, Robin, how many rhinoceroses have you harvested? And he's just like, too many. How many lions? Too many. You know, too many. And his book, the coffee table book that he has, is absolutely brilliant. It's beautifully done. And I sit through it, and I thumb through it with my son, and watching his eyes just get huge looking at all these pictures, and the stories of him getting mauled by the leopard,
Yep.
just wild, just really wild. And it's cool to listen to somebody's life experience that lives a life that's dramatically different than what you live. And it's fascinating. And listening and watching him as a hunter, it's so funny because he hunted. We hunted. Each of us hunted with Robin one afternoon, if I recall. And so the afternoon that I hunted with him, it was hilarious. It was me and Jake were in the
Hmm.
truck. And so Robin is just talking, and I'm listening to him, and he sees this group of zebras, and he just hammers the gas, and we're just off-road, just blasting through the bushveld. My head's bouncing off the ceiling of the
Yeah. Oh,
of
yeah.
and
He's
he's
not afraid to rip it
he's
for
oh man.
at all.
And
Yeah.
he's telling me as he's driving, he's just like, "All right, we're gonna get there, and you're gonna have 5 seconds to get out and shoot one of these zebras." And I was like, 5 seconds, bro? Like, are you serious? 5 seconds is not a lot of time, right?
Right.
And sure enough, man, he drove me right up to it, and we were about 500 yards away from these zebras. And our mission, guys, we were there to call animals, right? We were there to just call animals. So a little bit different experience
Right.
than a normal trip, a hunting trip to Africa. And I shot like 4 zebras out of this group of zebras, and it felt like I was doing something illegal. I was doing it. And he was
Yeah, and I
just,
think that's important to mention to the readers. First of all, they all got eaten,
oh, absolutely. Yeah.
and then second, so none of them, very little protein goes to waste. And so culling means that you have a biological carrying capacity of the acreage
Hmm.
that's there. And if there are too many, which oftentimes there can be very quickly because there's fewer leopards, cheetah, and lions than there once was,
Hmm.
they will what they call lose condition. You'll get kind of mass starvation. You'll get this giant death of a big portion of them if there's particularly dry, if they don't get enough rain. And so what they try and do is the government comes in and says, okay, you have X acreage, Y animals. It can only carry this much, right? There's 20 seats on the bus and you got 38.
Yep.
So you need to do this, right? And so we weren't, it was the opposite of trophy hunting. It was like, look, let's get on these animals and make it quick and
Hmm.
be accurate and fast. And so that's when it sounds like you're using vehicles and running up on them and
Yeah.
being unsporting. That's not what was happening, right? I mean, that's what we did in effect, but it wasn't. We weren't there. The point of the exercise was to thin the herd,
Yeah.
not take one in particular. The oldest, biggest male. Which is normally a very good approach too in terms of keeping the herds healthy.
Hmm.
But that was the case, and these were mountain zebra that are very rare in other places, and they're the only place you can truly hunt them is in Africa, I think, is Namibia. But there's more of them than there needs to be in some places. Some places, not everyone, and there was in this one, and they manage it on sort of a regional and a property based level, and his property is large enough to,
It's huge.
to get rated on its own in terms of what do you need to manage. So I hope I'm not misspeaking on some of the particulars, but that's generally
Yeah, I think
the
you're on
answer
point
there.
there. I mean, the other part of that story, so we make this, and I'm going to call it an engagement because that's exactly what it felt like.
It kind of is,
It
yeah.
felt like an
Yeah, it's
engagement.
like you have a dismount, you have a
Just
movement to contact and a dismount and
exactly right.
everything else. Yeah.
So we finish that all up, and the animals get put into a truck and get hauled off. um, and so uh we continue on our afternoon, and he spots a really, from his point of view, it was a really fantastic red hartebeest, and it
Hmm.
was standing super tall in this on this rock outcropping and skylining himself, and Robin's eyes get like hyper focused. He's like, we're gonna go get that one. And again, same thing, like he just like jerks the wheel off the road and starts tearing through this wadi. And I was like, whoa, 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 can we do this? Can we stalk? Can we just like get out of the truck and walk? Cause it just kind of feels weird.
Hmm.
And like the look on his face was priceless, man. He just looked at me like, damn it, fine. Right. So he pulls the truck
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
We start walking, and we get busted. Right. And the hartebeest runs off. And the wind wasn't right or something. And we're sitting at dinner that night and talking about and he calls me out big time. It was hysterical. He says, well, we would have had a gold label hartebeest in the skinning room, but he looks at me, he goes, but you wanted to stalk. I was just like,
Yeah, and if you want to get a feel for Robin in general, I think one of the and you can see it on YouTube for free now. In the Blood.
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was directed by George Butler, who is more familiar to people because he directed the documentary Pumping Iron
Oh,
with
yeah, yeah.
Arnold
Okay.
Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno in the early '80s, late '70s, early '80s, and it was a big hit, and it sort of launched. It was right at the time Arnold had kind of been dominating bodybuilding and had left and then come back because Lou Ferrigno had shown up, and Arnold's a big guy, but Lou was even bigger. Became the Incredible Hulk,
Hmm.
of our childhood on TV, and so that was kind of his original claim to fame. But they went and took so Teddy Roosevelt the fourth and fifth went and they got his rifles out of the Smithsonian that he had because he donated when Teddy Roosevelt went to Africa. He donated the samples of all the animals he shot to the Smithsonian, and some of them are mounted, and some of them were for scientific purposes and what have you. After his failed reelection attempt as a third party candidate, and so his the fourth and fifth went and they got the I don't know 400 nitros or something. I can't remember what it was. They sent them back to I think Holland and Holland again. I hope my memory's correct. It's not Rigby. I think it's Holland and Holland, and they had them re-regulated
Hmm.
for this hunt. And so they tried as much as possible to retrace the steps politically. Some of the countries that they could move through uh, in Roosevelt's time are like a no-go zone now. But that
Mm-hmm.
film is all about that, and they went back there and did that. And so that's a great one to watch to understand kind of what African hunting is like, and certainly seeing Robin, in his prime in the '80s, and they walk all day for a week to try and get at one Cape Buffalo in that film,
Right.
and I think another couple of guys sit for 4 or 5 days trying to shoot a crocodile, and they don't get it. But there's other they're in the Moiwasi on this vast open plain that's probably been developed a little more now than it was then. I don't know. But sadly, much of Africa is going that direction.
Yeah.
But that's a great film to if you're interested in African hunting in general, you're gonna you get the added bonus of getting a dose of our friend Robin Hurt, who's amazing guy.
Yeah. One of the so one of the things that I learned specifically in Africa was from the shooting perspective, the skills perspective was um, just unconventional positions and
Yeah.
learning how to shoot now. Like it's, I experienced some of that stuff um, in a combat environment, but in competition. It's funny that we're talking about this now because there's a recent flurry of activity on the interwebs. Um, go figure, right? So a heated conversation occurred on the interwebs about really saying, well, do you really think competition is applicable to hunting skills? Do you really think that, like, as an example, I don't know if you're familiar, Len, but there's a series out called the NRL Hunter, and NRL Hunter is a new, well, probably within the last 3 years, if my memory is correct. Um, all the stages are blind stages, so you can't see the targets, right? So you're behind some sort of terrain feature or an object where you can't see the stage, and you're called up to the stage. And when it's your turn to shoot, it'll either be uh, one position, four targets, two positions, two targets, so on and so forth. But there's no more than four targets or four positions. And so you have 4 minutes to
Hmm.
locate the targets on your own, range them, and then shoot them from whatever natural terrain features. A lot of guys are using tripods now, and
Hmm.
obviously, with any competitive sport, um, people are going to learn how to be more proficient at that activity, and so therefore, we start seeing things like giant double, triple pull, long pull bipods that you can, get yourself into very quick positions. And then guys are using their tripods as rear support instead of front support to get these targets, prosecuted and hit. And, the theory is that they want to simulate, each event should simulate hunting conditions for whatever geographic region it's in. And obviously out west, you're going to have more, broader expanses, wide open
Right.
spaces versus on the East Coast. There's not very many venues on the East Coast, but they're expanding. It needs a lot to run that kind of event. You need some space, right?
Hmm.
But one of the things that I learned specifically from hunting in Africa was learning how to get stable extremely quickly from traditional shooting sticks. And 90% of the shots that I took there was from the standing position. And that's really like what you get.
Right.
You have an
Right. Well,
opportunity.
I think that kind of answers your question, Caylen.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's no denying it
Yeah.
because any activity that you're doing that simulates any activity that you practice that's going to simulate the real, quote unquote, real thing is building skills. It's building proficiency. And regardless if it's nuanced and you need to learn how to play a game if you wish to be competitive, right? It's a mindset thing, right? If you wish to be competitive, then you're going to have to learn how to play the game. But if you're using that opportunity to just validate your training skills or your training programs and validate your current skill level and see where you're at if you're getting ready to go on a trip, then that's what that's used for. So I think the unanimous decision is for this, without the sake of argument or the sake of starting a discussion. I think it's unanimously achieved that when you're doing those activities, you truly are reinforcing good skills. And I learned that in Africa.
Yeah. I think that, first of all, you're never going to be conclusive in that argument, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
always going to be some degree of how close you are to it. I think one thing to remember that I would submit and point out there that certainly all of those things are good because they're positive repetitions that get you more familiar with your kit, or range finding, getting in a position, shooting quickly, right? Because you don't have a long time to glass a target over there.
Mhm.
But the part, kind of the cool part, I think, of being there, and in addition to Robin Daniel Mosley, who's super proficient as well, his stepson that runs the Namibia operation, you're going to have a PH who, a big part of his job is like, there's the target, here's the sticks, aim here,
Yeah.
right? And that's part of their job, is like being a spotter for you. And one of their major skill sets is, can they tell you where to aim and get you in a position where you can take an ethical shot.
Right.
And I think part of what, and that's kind of the cool part of Africa. You don't get that everywhere else. American guides don't do that. For those of you considering going to Africa, don't call a PH a guide. It's not
It's
cool.
faux pas.
You know? Yeah, they don't like that. They don't like that word. But because they go, professional hunter it takes it takes a year and a half or so to just get the license, and then you have to, and they're trained in, not only hunting but first aid and biology, and they have to know how to recognize the game, clean the game, shoot the game, how to evacuate sick or hurt people, how to manage other people, non-shooters. They have, a lot of the natives are scouts for them. So there's a lot of moving parts going on. And it's not only you have to get a license, but also have an apprenticeship period as well. And so it's a big deal to them. Like it's
an accomplishment.
It's a prestigious thing. Right. And it means you can handle yourself, and those guys, I've not met one that, some are better than others, but they're all generally fairly proficient. I think it's good that they do that over there.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that can kill you out there than say here. But also having, they're kind of your coach in the field as well. It's kind of like having, a hunting guide or a fishing guide that can help you understand more of what you're seeing and what you're experiencing and what's going on with the game. But you got to remember there too, is you're generally walking, and you're walking a lot, and you're taking, like you said, 90% of the time, a stand-up shot. And it's usually, I've seen many of them just carry bamboo sticks with rawhide lashing on it, and they just split it and you're right on the target, and there you go. And he's going to say, it's because they're going to understand your caliber and your the ballistics, and they're going to say, aim 3 inches down from the top, from his shoulder, right, or whatever, depending upon the angle of the shot. And that's always helpful. But that's a factor too, is you have kind of it's almost a tribal hunting kind of thing. There's a lot of people working together to get to the same end. And yeah, is it cool to come up on 4 pieces of steel and range them all and pretend you're hunting? Yeah, that's cool. It's great. It's fantastic practice, and certainly isn't going to hurt you.
Nope.
At all. But just understand, if you haven't practiced shooting off of 2 sticks,
you need to.
You're not going to have, you probably will not have time to set up a tripod. It's not like it would be, some of the backcountry hunting we've done. Yeah, you got time, right? You're watching a bear from a long way away, or you're glassing stuff to say, is this one I really want? You have time to be selective and really range things in and move and relocate and make a plan and be methodical. They're 300 yards and in, probably most of your shots, probably 80% of them are 200 and in.
Yeah.
And you're shooting standing over grass. Sometimes you get like an anthill, a big termite mound that's a really nice field rest. They're not going to let you take shots offhand, I don't think. I mean, unless it's really close. Like I took one on a water buck, and I was like right on top of him and just aimed down the barrel. It was a follow-up shot where we'd stalked in, and had we not had one of those little mean little tracking dogs, we wouldn't have gotten on him.
Scrunch.
As Scrunch.
Scrunch
Scrunch is still after it. Yeah. I the last time I talked to him, Scrunch is still, Scrunch bit me a couple times. And
that's my zebra, Len.
Yeah, exactly right. I think it was actually your zebra, wasn't it? And I was trying to move it.
It was.
I was trying to move it, and she thought I was. Yeah, she thought it. So these, for the sake of the listeners, they have these dogs that are, and they vary depending upon their kind of preferences. Like, are you, a pointer, setter, or spaniel person? They have different mixes, but they're generally like a German hunting terrier crossed with a Jack Russell. So they're small, and they walk behind you until they're called to the front, and they'll track a blood trail, and they get kind of defensive of the game once they get to it. Like that's their thing. And right. And until their handler calls them off, they're kind of gonna really let you put your hands on it. And even afterwards, they're still kind of not cool with you. And then, later on that night, they'll be asleep in your lap. But when that game's on the
When
ground,
it's work
they'll
time,
bite you. They don't
I'm
hurt you,
working.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're on the clock for
I
sure. So
wonder
I think that's
I wonder how
that.
healers would do. Looking at like
Probably
my
pretty
dogs,
well.
I think healers would do
Yeah.
really well in that environment because they are smaller. They're fucking mean as hell when they want to
Yeah.
be, and they'd probably do really well with that.
Well, those animals get gored, they
Yeah.
get stepped on, they get shot by dumb hunters, or
Mhm.
they move so fast, and sometimes it really isn't the hunter's fault. Like you get a
Yeah.
situation where they're putting a follow up shot on it, and half a second ago that dog was in a safe place,
Yeah.
and the minute you break the shot, they're running across doing whatever they do, and they're
Mhm.
doing it at like warp speed. So
And they're little.
do accidents happen? Yeah, but man, those dogs are really hard to after the initial shot, like they're on. And that's
Mhm.
another thing to keep in mind is that, once you put a shot on an animal, it's the PH's job to make sure that you harvest that animal. So if
That's
they don't, you know,
that's something that a lot of people don't realize in Africa is that if you connect with an animal with a bullet, regardless if you recover it, that's your animal. Period. End of story. Right.
yeah,
And that's a kind of a stark comparison to the way things are here in the United States.
yeah, you're going to get, not only are you going to get charged for it in terms
Mhm.
of your trophy fee, you are also going to be obliged to exhaust pretty much every resource
To get it.
to get to it,
Yeah.
right? And I think the PH has some latitude to say, did you make a bad shot or whatever in terms of it
Sometimes
all it
things
all
happen. Sometimes things
kind of,
happen.
kind of depends. But in general, it's your job to hunt it, to find it and recover the animal. And that's when it gets dangerous. When you get somebody that gets nervous, puts a bad shot on a Cape Buffalo
Mhm.
or a leopard or something like that. And that's almost 100% of the time how hunters and PHs get hurt is they'll take a bad shot and they'll get nervous, and then the PHs have to go in and they generally tell the hunters, particularly one that's taken a bad shot, like, all right, I
Yeah.
gotta I
I
gotta
gotta
go
come
earn
home.
my pay here, so just stay in the truck,
Mhm.
or just keep away. And they go in, and you got a wounded leopard or wounded lion in heavy cover, and they're obliged to go in and make sure it's not left wounded. And a lot of non-hunters don't understand that,
Yeah.
right? That's something they endeavor to do, and quite honestly, put their life at risk doing it. So
They absolutely
again,
do.
major difference there. But to circle back to the marksmanship piece, I think there's a lot of hunters, and I think I was one of them, honestly, who thought, oh, it's not going to be a big deal to shoot off sticks, right? How
Mhm.
big of a difference is? It's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
um, and particularly when you're standing and you got game there, and it's usually really exciting. Got a lot of sensory inputs going on, and then you're trying
Mhm.
to negotiate these sticks. There is technique to it, and they do help you. But I think it's probably a good segue to talk about what you and I practiced with
Yeah.
planting your feet, locking your knees, pretending you've got a plumb bob coming off your crotch,
Mhm.
and then using your big muscle groups to move and adjust, as opposed to feet, hands, knees, and ankles.
Yeah.
You try and be a little more geometric about it. And that was super helpful to me. And then I've since practiced, since I've come back here, with just a two stick setup to try and get in that position
Mhm.
fast, and think, kind of go through a rapid mental checklist of, okay, plant your feet, lock your knees, lean forward, lean in, watch the wobble.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because that
Yes.
was super valuable to me.
What we've discovered is managing in position. We call that positional shooting. And it's not a legacy skill, meaning we're not shooting offhand. We're using something to support the forend of the rifle.
Mm,
In this case, it's a set of shooting sticks, and we were practicing on just basically what we would call a bipod, but really big, tall. They used to be called Stony Point shooting sticks. Now they're, I think, mossy oak bottom. So now they're
mhm,
mossy oak, whatever they are. Um, but in Africa, you're going to use a tripod, right? You're going to use 3 sticks lashed together. And there's various renditions of these things running around out there. The European guys use uh, a set of V's. It's really kind of interesting the way that they have it set up. They have a V system, and it's a forward and a back, a V forward and a V backwards, and it's just like it looks like this geometric shape. But then when they
Mhm.
spread it out and they throw a rifle in there, the rifle's supported at the fore end as well as at the buttstock. I find it a little bit more cumbersome just because A, I'm not used to it, but B, now I've got to manage and get this rear support dialed, whereas um, I'm only used to making sure that the front end is supported, and then I'm using my body to direct the back of the rifle. So the thing that we try to explain to people is positional shooting success is determined A, by your ability to achieve a natural point of aim, really quickly and efficiently, and B, understanding what muscle groups and body parts manage what wobble you're seeing. So if you're seeing a vertical wobble, right? If you're seeing like a vertical pattern, it could be an oval, it could be a figure eight, it could be, um, generally it's an oval or a figure eight, right? Which is an indication that my center of gravity is not being well managed on the fore and aft plane. So I've got, I'm either leaning too much into the rifle or I'm leaning too far to the rear. My center of gravity is off balance, which is why I'm trying to tell you, stand more upright. Don't lean into the system, because when you lean into the system, if you don't have a heavy object to absorb that force that you're leaning into, meaning the support, you're going to have some flex, you're going to have some wobble going on there. And that will dramatically affect your sight picture. And then the second wobble that you're most commonly going to see is a uh, it's going to be a horizontal wobble, which is going to look like an infinity sign, right? And it's going to go back
Mhm.
and forth. And if as soon as you see that wobble in your brain, that should be an indication for your subconscious mind to go to work and start fixing the left right axis, right? The horizontal axis, meaning I've got one foot weighted heavier than the other. I've got a knee bent on the right side of my body that if I lock that out and re-square myself, boom, it solidifies that wobble and shrinks it down. And then the goal there, the first step should be identify the wobble, mitigate it by natural point of aim and body inputs. And then the second thing that we really have learned is sight picture management, in the sense of we don't want to look at the reticle. I know that's very counterintuitive to
Mhm.
what we've been taught in the past. If you look at the reticle, that is sensory input that is overpowering your ability to control your mind. Meaning when you see that wobble and you're chasing that reticle back and forth, your brain says, I want that to stop. I want it to stop. And as you try to make it stop, it actually gets worse, because the inputs, you're never going to you're never going to physically be able to capture or get behind or get in front of the brain, right? So you're always going to be those nerve impulses are always going to be firing to make corrections, and most often than not, you're going to be behind that power curve. So it's going to make things worse. So the goal is to say, here's my natural point of aim. This is the wobble. I've reduced the wobble into the size or inside the size of the target. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on where I want the bullet to go. And I'm going to center that wobble zone over the area that I want the bullet to go. And I'm going to send the bullet right into, you're going to give that bullet to Jesus and you're going to send it right into that wobble zone. And it works every single time. Every single time. We've done tests where we've said, okay, for these 10 shots, I want you to do nothing but look at the dot where you want the bullet to go and ignore your wobble. And then over here on this target, I want you to take 10 shots where all you're doing is focusing on the reticle itself. And the groups tell the story. The groups tell the story every single time. The groups are much, much bigger when guys are consciously chasing the wobble versus when we're over on the other target and we're just using that natural point of aim and the body mechanics to reduce that wobble zone. and focus on where you want the bullet to go, the groups are always smaller.
Yeah, one element that we talked about that I think is helpful, and this is not new advice at all, which is dialing your scopes back to
Yeah.
a
Lower
lower
magnification.
magnification,
Yes.
right? And so if you're super zoomed in, you're going to have reticle bounce all over the place, and it's going to be even more maddening.
Yep.
And in Africa, in particular, I've found it's particularly with the speed that's required at times is running that dial back to the lower end of the magnification scale, and then dialing it in tighter if you need to.
Hmm.
And the illuminated reticles help. I like them. Some people have different opinions on them, but you can it's almost like a red dot sight. You can look through. You don't have to find a thin piece of black that crosses
Sure.
in the bush in a dark background. You know exactly where the middle of that scope is, and so again, that was really helpful too.
Yeah. And real, it's just the practice behind it. The I do a lot of one shot drills where I have one target, and I try to keep that target, inside 2 minutes of angle. And these are also really you can do these on paper too. A lot of people shy away from doing paper stuff, and I know most of the guys that are listeners, or the people that are listeners, they know that we shoot a lot of paper. And the reason that we shoot a lot of paper at 100 yards is that's where we want to identify all of the nuances of our shooting position and the nuances of us trying to manage the central nervous system. And I say try because you are trying. You're never, and I say never, but you can master it, but it's always there poking you, saying, the nervous system is always going to try to override your ability to break a clean shot. That's what its job is. Its job is to keep you safe. And an explosion happening 6 inches in front of your face is not something that your nervous system believes is going to be safe. So it's going to try to protect you from that. And by protecting you from that, there's a sympathetic activity that happens right when you press the trigger. Your body flinches, and it's a natural occurrence. Um, and you can't train it out. I don't care what anybody says. You cannot train that out. It's your nervous system taking control, and the only way that you can get yourself through that process is to get your mind, because you can only focus on one thing at one time. Your conscious mind can only focus on one thing at one time. And so if your conscious mind is focused on something like the trigger press, if you're talking yourself through the trigger press and that's where your focus of effort and attention is, your mind can't be thinking about what the wobble zone is. Your mind can't be thinking about what's about to happen with my trigger press, and I'm about to get, walloped by this recoil. No, it's just a difficult thing to do. And so there's specific tools that we have to utilize to keep our conscious mind focused on the task at hand.
I thought it might be a good time to ask you this question because I'm curious about it. Is the point blank zeroing of your rifle
Oh
again?
yeah.
One less thing you have to worry about, right? You've got a zone that you can basically put it on a target and an animal sized target. So can you
Sure.
give me a little more inside baseball on that because I
Sure.
can always use
It's pretty
some refresher.
it's pretty straightforward. So all we're doing when we're using the maximum point blank range method of engaging a target is, if you can think of your the target size as, like, let's just say it's a game animal, right? Obviously that's where you're going to go shoot plains games. So I would say the maximum vital zone size. I mean, African animals can be pretty big in terms of their body size. You can't compare a gemsbuck to even a hartebeest. They're two totally
Mhm.
different sized animals, right? I would say a gemsbuck's vital zone is that of an elk, whereas a hartebeest's vital zone is that of an East Coast whitetail, right? It's a smaller
Mhm.
animal. So let's just say, for example, you've got this
Except for that
cat.
one that you had to stalk, it was a lot
Yeah,
bigger, and
yeah,
you know,
right. So actually, I'll use something smaller. Okay, I'll just use this business card here. All right, we got a zero
yeah.
compromise plug for ZCO. All right, so if this is your target size, right? So you got this target size, and let's just say it's 12 inches top to bottom. Think of a line, an imaginary line that's parallel to one another, right? Coming off this card and going out back to you. Okay. and you want to keep the bullet inside those two lines. You want to keep the bullet inside the top line and inside the bottom line, which means what we're going to do is we're going to dial a specific elevation to the rifle for a distance beyond our zero range, right? For most center fire rifles, if you dial a dope of 350 yards ish, that's going to be what we would call your optimum point blank zero. And that optimum point blank zero is going to optimize this space, or this cone that we want to keep the bullet inside, because if this is our vital zone, we want that bullet to strike somewhere in there. And we're not going for precision here. We're just going to get a bullet inside that vital zone. And so this allows you to minimize your mental workload by always telling yourself, no matter what, I'm going to hold center. No matter what, I'm going to hold center. And if the animal is in front of the range that I've zeroed my scope to, the bullet's going to hit higher on the target. And if the animal is farther than that range, it's going to hit lower. Now, your job is to figure out at what point in time is the bullet coming out of that threshold. Mainly what we're concerned about is on the deep side, right? On the long side. How far,
Right.
meaning how efficient is your trajectory and how long is this space going to extend that I can keep that bullet inside those constraints, those vertical constraints. And so usually for center fire rifles like the 6.5 PRC that you're going to shoot, the 6.5 Creedmoor, they, believe it or not, they have pretty much the same horsepower out to about 400 or 500 yards. And that's when you're going to start seeing the difference in external ballistics over one cartridge to the next.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep. So if you just dial a dope for 350 yards, if you look in your Ford-off solver, dial a dope for 350 yards for your 6.5 PRC, that should be like 1.2 mils or something like that, 1.1 mils. You're going to be able to hold center on an animal out to about 380 and hit it low in the vitals and all the way up to the muzzle. Like if you come around a copy and all of a sudden, boom, you see something, there he is, he snuck a little closer, hold center, and you're going to hit him, maybe 2 or 3 inches high, right? At that range of maybe say 50 meters or 50, 70 meters, somewhere in there.
Well, I know that, and personally, I've had circumstances where, holdovers work for me, and then I've even had the solution reticles, where it gives you a dot at a range, and I had a circumstance of, a somewhat well documented one, because I was on the Amazon show with Richard Mann, who's going to Africa with me on this trip, or I'm going with him, and the first shot, I think I had a deflection. It was kind of, once we got down to where the odd edge sheep was standing, there was a lot of brush around, and I think I had had a deflection. And then the next shot, I put the crosshairs, in fast under stress, put the crosshairs right on the impact point, and the bullet landed right at the foot, at the bottom of the front hoof. So I was straight on in terms of aiming, but my mind had defaulted to crosshairs on the target, not chase the dot, because it was a new system. It was a great system. It worked fine, but you revert to your to your reptile brain under stress, and went
That's
back
perfect.
to
It
put
is.
the X on the kill zone, and I did, and it, I lined it up and broke the shot, and I missed, not because I didn't see the target or because I had bad technique, or it was because I put the X right on it. And sure enough, when we it was over 400-yard shot, right? So we backed it up and kind of did the math, and it would have been 23.5 inches high. And sure enough, it was basically the difference from the aim point down the end of his leg. I mean, almost to the inch.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of cute tricks, but that, I think that 0 point, or that the point, and it's not like you hear on TV, I shot him at point blank range. It's a different definition, or misuse of a definition on television, I think. So it's the range the bullet travels within a fixed distance, right? Vertically.
Yes.
So I think it's a great tip. I'm going to use it, and I think it's something that folks should understand.
Well, the thing that you brought up that I want to highlight is the fact that what you said is it holds true. It's psychology, like the reptile brain. your brain, it wants to go when you see an X, right? It's like photography. It's composition of photography, right?
Mhm.
It's the basics of photography composition. If you have leading lines, right, you want to use those leading lines to drag the focus to what the subject is, right? And in this case, with a reticle, where are the four leading lines directing your attention to? Right to the center of the crosshair. So
Right to the vitals, right? Yeah,
yeah,
and the
and
center of the
so
crosshairs. Yeah,
we have to, as human beings, we have to understand what that is, and we have to be able to capitalize on that, because by doing anything different, you're literally you're going against your reptilian psychology, and you're going against your central nervous system by trying to say, oh yeah, in the heat of this moment, I'm going to remember to hold, 1.4 mils, right? And in the heat of that moment, the vast majority of people, unless you have thousands of reps, you're going to go center of that crosshair. And so why not set yourself up for that success? Don't fight your brain, don't fight your body. Just set yourself up for success when you know that you're going to be in those situations. Now it's different when we have time and opportunity, and we can take that time to go, okay, that target's at 525 yards. I'm going to consult my dope card. I'm going to say, okay, at 520 yards, I need to dial 2.7 mils. The wind is doing this. That's 10 miles an hour. I need to hold, point six to the left, whatever it is, that's a little different because you're not under that intense now stress. But
right.
when you
Yeah.
know that you have a potential to be in that high stress environment, set yourself up for success, capitalize on how your brain and your body works, and you're going to have more success there.
I know that we're pushing on version 2.0, 2.5, 3.0 of this podcast, but I think one of the bigger takeaways of your visit for me was setting up the rifle,
Mm.
and I want to talk about that if we can,
Yeah, absolutely.
because that was I think that was this was one of the biggest ones. So to recap, and you can edit this out because I think we talked about it a little bit before, but you have a process that you go through in terms of getting your rifle ready, right?
Hmm.
So the normal hunter, I think, would be I'm going to go to the range and zero it to 100 because I know I'm going to zero it again in Africa because it's going to be a different temperature, different altitude. All of the changes that the aircraft has when you go in Africa, just so you know, your zero is never going to be the same when you get there. Never, never. Like in 4 trips and probably 10 rifles. I've never had it happen, and it shouldn't be, right? Because you're in you're a different place, different barometric pressure, different temperature. Here in Utah, it was what 20s, 30s.
Hmm.
At 6,000 feet, it's not going to be, thank God, either of those. It's going to be warmer and lower altitude, and you broke out your fix it sticks and said, all right, here's what we're going to do. Or I think the biggest shocker was the loose action screws
Oh yeah.
that I didn't expect. Like I expected maybe some loose pick rails or maybe some loose spaces, or that's always the thing, right? You get dropped, it's knocked, it's whatever's the scope off kilter. You kind of think of that, but you for whatever reason in my mind, and I say this, just being very transparent, maybe even vulnerable here is we had one of my rifles that has not been used a lot was like finger loose, like literally could press the flesh of my finger into the action screw, which it was an older rifle. It's a restored rifle, but it was a flathead screw, and I could turn it with just the pressure of my finger,
Hmm.
and it was that loose. And so I was shocked that it was that loose, and all of them were all of the ones we had in terms of torquing it to spec were loose, but I was more shocked at that one. And then actually, it performed a lot better at the range than the last time I had used it, where I had only zeroed it and didn't actually end up going on a hunt with it. So um, that was that was an eye opener. Like that convinced me, okay, let's think about this methodically from bottom to top. Like, are the action screws set? Like, are you building a concrete foundation? Or are you building one out of sand?
Mm-hmm.
Right. The concrete is the action screws, or they torque to spec. And I think on ours, we did 65.
Yeah, 65.
And then the next step was a pick rail on this particular rifle. The one that we really worked hard on was the Frankie. Thankfully, Phil's rifle is already set up, so I had, hopefully I won't break it. I'm really, Phil, if you're listening, I'm going to really try and take good care of it. Africa is Africa, but I'm going to really try and take good care of it. But the Frankie, Momentum All Terrain Elite, it's a long title, was straight out of the box. And you took you said there's usually lube between the pick rail and the receiver, and sure enough, we took it off. There it was. I was like, oh, okay. Like, liquids don't compress well under pressure, as we know from breaching charges, right? So, got to get that out of there. And so anyway, I don't want to, run away with this here, Caylen, but it was impactful to me.
It's good, and I would say so. To your comment, one of the things that we've been paying very close attention to lately is the zero retention. And so I would suggest that you pay very close attention to that modern day hunting rifle, the 6.5 PRC that you have. When you take that, I would be willing to bet that even if you take that rifle from transcontinental flight, right, get to Africa, pull it out, throw your suppressor on there, I would be willing to bet that your zero is going to be within 2 to 3/10 of, maybe 2/10 of a mil. And the reason I say this is every class now, what we do to illustrate the rifle setup is we take, I'll take my rifle apart in front of the students, like all the way down to barreled action. Everything's off. I don't take the scope out of the rings, but I take the scope mount off the base and go through exactly what we went through with you. And I can put that. I went to the United Kingdom, did this class, took the rifle completely apart, put it back together, zeroed it, and I was literally dead on balls. Dead on balls.
That's remarkable.
I didn't.
I
Even
hope
check.
that's the case. I hope it's the case. It would be. I'd love to have a first in that respect. That'd be fantastic.
Please do put that.
I'll take a picture.
Notes.
I'll take a picture and we'll see how close it gets. That's really a good test, actually.
What we've discovered is that if you having quality components obviously is key. Making sure that you have quality components to build your rifle, like you alluded to. Are you building your foundation on concrete, or are you building it on sand? And if you notice how much windage did we eat up on that Frankie and Steiner combination to get that scope zeroed?
A bunch.
We ate up a bunch.
To the point to where we thought we had a mechanical
right
circumstance, and then ultimately it resolved itself. But
the reason that we ate up all of that windage is because the base of that rifle is not aligned properly with the axis of the bore. So if your base is off left or right, you're obviously going to have to eat up that windage with your optic because the bore is not pointed in the same direction as the base. So that's an immediate indication that we've got something that's wonky left or right on the horizontal axis between the optic and the line of bore. So once we learn and understand more about what's actually going on with the rifle from a mechanical perspective, it leads us down the rabbit holes of, hey, these are some things that we can do to enhance that rifle. Maybe take that rifle to a gunsmith, have them re-indicate those scope mount holes, re-drill them, tap them, make sure that they're perfectly aligned. Because a lot of gunsmiths, what they'll do is they will bore those holes out and they will essentially just recenter the holes, because most of them are not accurate. Most factory rifles.
Yeah. That's a really good point, particularly when you think of a rifle like that. And one of the benefits of that Frankie rifle is it's got an 8.5-inch long pick rail, right? So you can put low, medium, and high power optics on it, or night vision, or whatever. So there's a lot of real estate there, but that's a lot to line up, right, over a length of your space. So there's a lot more margin for error in terms of getting it just a little bit off. is going to make a big difference, right?
So some perspective for you. I don't know if we covered this in Utah, but um, the dimension of your hair, a human hair, is approximately 3,000th of an inch, just depending on what kind of genes you got, right?
Mhm.
But 3,000ths of an inch at the buttstock, like where that connection's made on your shoulder, to the target at 100 yards. That if you move 3,000ths of an inch, that's going to move that point. Um, a half of an inch at 100 yards. So we're looking at this and going, okay, that's a big dose of perspective right there. And we go, whoa, okay, that means something, right? That's
Mhm.
mathematics that we cannot escape. So um, keeping that at the forefront of your mind. So a half of an inch is a half of a minute at 100 yards, and that's 0.15 mils of angle, right? So you start doing the math with that and you go, okay, man, if those screws are, off by, 20 thousandths, depending on, in relationship to the line of bore, and we're going to
Mhm.
eat up a lot of windage to get that scope zeroed.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and the same thing goes with elevation as well.
Yeah. I think just understanding that that can be off even from a good factory gun. And this rifle performed really well once we got it all sorted out. But
Hmm.
to not think that your bullets are off or your scope is off and go just really start with the basics. Like, is the action attached to the stock in a consistent and torqued way?
Yep.
And then is the pick rail lined up? Is it or not? And are they torqued to spec? And is that secure? And then are the bases secure? And are the rings secure? I went to the range much more confident. But
Yeah.
I was probably oblivious. I'm not brand new at this, but on the other hand, I did feel a lot better knowing that we had walked that from bottom to top and said, okay, what adjustments we make here are going to be
Hmm.
true to the rifle. That
Yeah.
I felt handled everything that we could.
Yeah. And
Right.
now that you have that knowledge, when you go, when you get to where you're going, you're going to be able to say, okay, these are my pre-fire checks, right? These are my pre-fire, pre-flight, pre-hunt, whatever you want to call it. These are my checks. And especially with that wood stocked Mauser, if that's not tended to, because that's a wooden stock, right? That wood is going to move, it's going to swell, and it's going to shrink based upon temperature and humidity. And so that's going to stretch and elongate those fasteners and cause them to loosen up. We do see that time to time with aluminum chassis on the competition rifles. Both vibrations are going to loosen them up, as well as different heating conditions.
Mhm.
So those are always part of my pre-flight checks to make sure that those action screws are torqued to spec, making sure that everything's tight. Another thing that you want to incorporate into your pre-flight checks is suppressors, because with titanium suppressors, especially, those materials between the bore and the suppressor, those two different types of materials are going to cool off at different rates, and that's going to lead to you're a metal guy, you ground knives
Yeah.
for a little while, so you
Right.
understand this stuff, so if that heating, expansion and contraction at different rates of time and speed, it's going to lead to loose things, right? And so if you take it for granted that your suppressor is on there and you don't grab that thing and do that snap torque every freaking day or multiple times a day, especially if you're sending large strings of fire in a training environment or a competition environment, that's all things that you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and it probably is going to have a little less of an effect hunting if you snap torque it at the very beginning, right? Because
Oh
you're
yeah.
not firing all day long. But for certain, when we were on the range with all of those rifles that we fired suppressed, they all loosened up over time because it was very cold outside. Not
Yep.
very cold. It was fairly cold
Hmm.
outside, and so you do have a cooling effect
Yep.
from an ambient temperature, and you've got titanium and the
Mhm.
steel of the barrel, and they
Yep.
all loosened up, and then you start before you unless you think of it right away, you start stringing out shots. And you're like, oh, what's going on? What's broken? And it
Yep.
was just a little
S
a little a
And then
little
boom,
quick torque, and you're
right
like, all
back
right,
it
let's
goes.
start over, right
Yep.
back to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, now it's like if I see a shot, if for me personally with my rifle, if I see a shot go low, if I break a clean shot and it goes low, I'm immediately looking to my muzzle device. and it's most likely because I didn't check it and it came loose. And so that's why it's really important to incorporate those pre-fire checks into your system.
Yeah, I think in terms of the suppressor, well, I'll be taking it along. And it what'll be fun though is I think on both is the length of the Froggy's a lot less than
Yeah.
the modern day hunter rifles. So it'll be interesting to feel how those are on the stock and what I trade off, and maybe get over there and the choice that I might make. Because one of the great things about Plains game is you get to choose, right? They have tons of different species, and some almost by definition are going to be closer shots than others. And so it may be kind of choosing the 9 iron over the 3 wood in
Yep.
terms of which one we go with there.
Yep. That's going to be good. You can pick your tool. Man, I'm pumped for you, Len. This is going to be badass, man. I'm super stoked. I can't wait to see the pictures. You're going to be off here in what, a couple days, yeah?
Yeah, the in a
Yep.
week from today, and it's snowy and cold here in Utah, and so I'm done, man. It's March.
It's time
I
for
don't
it
even
to get
ski.
warm.
It's just cold. It's
Yeah, yeah.
just yeah.
Time to be done.
It is the time to go to Africa if you're blessed enough to go, and I'm super fortunate and glad to be able to do so. But yeah, it's a good time to go, and it's going in the Eastern Cape
Yep.
where I've not been before.
Yeah, you're gonna have
So
a
I'm
badass
excited
time.
about that as well. But I know yeah, it should be great.
Yeah. Well, so before I have a hard stop here, Len, and I think we covered a lot of ground here, and there's nothing saying that we can't come back and have another conversation if there's more stuff that we'd like to cover. No big deal. But let everybody know where they can find you. I know that you're not super huge on social media, but let everybody know where they can find you and where this article is going to be published, or articles are going to be published.
Yeah. So Waldron, my last name WALDRON .pond, on Instagram, and then waldronpond.com is my website. These articles will be in Gun Digest, and I think one may end up in Recoil. Not is kind of editor's choice on that, but for sure, two of these, the rifle reviews and of your rifle, the Modern Day Hunter and the Franke, will be in Gun Digest in the second half of 2024.
Heck yeah, man. Super pumped for you, dude. I'm envious. The Eastern Cape of South Africa is absolutely gorgeous. I've hunted there as well, and I think you're gonna have a fantastic time. You're bringing Amy along with you. That's gonna be super fun for
Yep.
her. And yeah, I can't wait to see all the pics.
Yeah, outstanding. Well, you shall have them. So until next time.
Absolutely, Len. Thanks for your time, buddy. And this was a good time. I'm glad we actually finally got a chance to put this together, and we didn't get kicked off the internet like we were before. So
Yeah, we've had some tech issues. Yeah.
it's all right. I live out in the country. You live in the city, so it's not your internet, it's mine.
Well, luckily we're not in a situation where the snow is impacted, because it does do that.
Yeah.
We're not as good as we think we are here in Utah sometimes.
Well, thanks a lot, Len, and I will catch up with you shortly. But thank you for coming on board, and this was a good conversation to have. And all the conversations we had were awesome. So thank you very much, man.
All right, my friend. Take care.
All right.